Are you here? Is Gabriel here? I know you were going to be here. Anyway, maybe you're upstairs. But IACT is a small but mighty nonprofit that is dedicated to serving people who are affected by mass atrocities. It's an anti-genocide group that Inside LA has been working with for years now. And the reason that we've been working with them, and this comes from what Sean was teaching us, is that when IACT went into the Darfuri refugee camps by the border with Sudan, they went and asked the refugees, what do you need, and is there a way that we can help? And of course, that's what always should happen, that people would go and ask the community. They're the experts on themselves and their community and what they need. But it isn't how it usually happens because, I don't know, I guess the need is so great that there are usually these sort of top-down solutions that can be one-size-fits-all and just come in and take care of emergency needs. But I want to say about our Insight in Action program that wherever we have gone, we have been invited and asked to come. And this is really important because of all the things that Sean was saying, that it's really true that it's often more healing for us to be of service, to go and help, than to be vulnerable and be helped. And it's also true that, well, the Buddha said it at the beginning, you know, that the first truth of life is to understand about suffering and to understand about our own suffering and to know what it is and to be able to explore it. Because, as you said, the moment we acknowledge it, that's the moment that we start to see, how does it come to us? What are we doing to participate in it? And how can it end? And that's the moment it can transform. And that's our mindfulness practice. So now I want to introduce Jack, my beloved husband, Jack. And it's hard to know what to say about Jack, because I think the most important thing that I can say, being married to him and spending a lot of time with him, is that Jack walks his talk, and that what you see is actually what you get. And that is really important to me. I've been blessed to know many wonderful spiritual teachers with all kinds of wonderful titles. And not all of these extremely accomplished beings are actually able to accomplish that, to really just live the things that they teach and to not ask other people to do anything they would not do themselves. And so one of the things that I most love and treasure about Jack is that congruence, that integration of what he's teaching with who he is. And that feels like the most important thing. So
let me get set up a little bit here. Trudy tells me that I'm her best husband so far. You know. I'm honored to be in that role. Thank you, dear. And also really happy to see you all here and to be at this event, because it's partly an event of, you know, it's a fundraiser for Inside LA, which does all these amazing things. And there are a lot that weren't even listed, working with veterans coming out, and working with the nurses and the medical practitioners in Children's Hospital who don't have anybody or a safe place to actually talk about what they have to do with one another. You can't go home and say, I'm sorry that the baby I was taking care of today died. And that happens every week, you know. There needs to be a place, whether it's the veterans or the nurses or the others who are serving, to be able to come and be held themselves and understand that we actually have to hold one another in this. So I'm really honored and delighted to be part of both Inside LA and to have you here. And it feels really fitting we were trying to figure out when to do this. It's kind of close to all the holiday madness, you know, but it also seems fitting in a way, the kind of teaching and conversation and spirit that we're hearing. So I'm going to talk for a bit, tell a few stories and so forth, and then take a pause, and Trudy and I will have time with Father Greg. We'll talk about that in a minute, or in a little bit, and then come back again and do a ritual to close the day. I want to start with a story. I worked also in prison projects, and we've invited the San Quentin Gospel Choir to come. It turns out to Spirit Rock to sing and so forth. They wouldn't let them out, so we only got the San Quentin outside choir, which is the guys that had been discharged from their time there and so forth. But anyway, good close friends of mine brought into San Quentin the Gyuto Tantric monks, who are connected with the Dalai Lama's tradition, also coming to Spirit Rock. They were going to go into San Quentin. Those are those guys who can do the multivocal chanting, kind of amazing. So they arranged to have a concert in San Quentin for the Gyuto Tantric Choir and the San Quentin Gospel Choir, and that they would sing at this for the guys inside. And the woman who's a close friend of mine, Mirbai, who was arranging this, got really nervous once they were supposed to begin, because she thought, how are they going to receive these guys? They're little guys in skirts, right, to start with, and they're heathens. And most of the San Quentin Gospel Choir are people who got religion and, you know, where Jesus saved their life. And how are these people going to be seen by the men inside in the choir, especially? So she said, I want to introduce these men to you. You have to understand that many of them have spent some years in prison. Some have been tortured when they were in their homeland in Tibet. Then when they were escaped prison, or when they got out after that time, they walked over the highest mountains on earth, sometimes with very little clothes to wear. They live in exile in a monastery in the south of India. They cannot go home to see their homeland or their families. And what's kept them going all this time is their prayers and their songs. So they want to sing for you the songs and the prayers that kept them going in prison, so you'll understand it. And they did their chants. And then the San Quentin Gospel Choir got up and said, oh, brothers, and they sang their songs, and then they just embraced one another. And this is really the story of what we have to do in the world in some way, because it's not their suffering or somebody that we're going to help. It's us. It's us, and this is, as Sean and Trudy were saying, this is our time. In some way, maybe we were meant for this, and our ancestors are all survivors. That's why you're here, and they survived a lot. And that's in you. It's in your DNA, and it's in your body, and it's in this possibility for you. But we need to see it in a different way. I was doing a dialogue on climate change, which is its own big story and something that we have to be able to not hide from or deny, but turn ourselves toward and say, this is us, and this is our life, and this is our planet. And the dialogue I was doing was with Costa Rican diplomat Cristina Figuera, who is the United Nations ambassador for climate change, who helped to design what happened in Rio, and then she was in charge of the Paris Climate Accord. And she was talking about how she got really burned out and depressed in trying to get the Paris Climate Group to work. She was overwhelmed, and the struggles were too great. And some friends to her said, you know, you need to get away. You need a different medicine, why don't you go, she was in Europe doing this, why don't you go to the south of France? There's this place called Plum Village, and there's a teacher there named Thich Nhat Hanh, a Zen master. So she went, because she was desperate, as she said. And of course, when you meet Thich Nhat Hanh, Dick Baker, who was the abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center, described when Thich Nhat Hanh first came to teach there in the early 80s. We were there. He said he's a cross between a cloud, a snail, and a piece of heavy machinery. And so when you're in the presence of Thich Nhat Hanh, something happens, and it happened to her. And she said she had this very deep realization that most of the basis for the struggle at the Paris Climate Accord was because people were seeing each other as victims or perpetrators. Who was doing it to whom, who owed what to whom, and that was the struggle. And when she learned to quiet her mind and listen to her body and to her heart, and to listen to what Thich Nhat Hanh's articulation of the Dharma, which is really the Dharma of interdependence, that it's us. She said, I realized that the only way we can do this is as if we're family. And she went back with an entirely different consciousness and somehow wrangled 182 countries to sign the Paris Climate Accord. And in a certain way, that's what we're doing when we go to inside LA or when we do our practice, is to find that place in ourself that knows that we're connected in this way. When the Colombian Civil War of 50 years was nearing an end, there was this struggle to somehow bring these groups back together that had been fighting for so long. One of the things that the Colombian government did is they flew helicopters over the jungle where the insurgents had been, and they dropped out of the helicopters photos of the family members of the people who'd been in the jungle for a long time, of their brothers or sisters, their children or grandchildren, their mothers or parents if they were still alive. Because as they said, these people forgot that they had family. And seeing that allowed for a different kind of conversation. As Mother Teresa says, the problem with you is you draw your family circle too small. So it doesn't matter that it's difficult. We're in a family that's been through a lot of difficulties, and we cause a lot of difficulties to one another. You may have noticed that, both individually and collectively and socially. Trudy and I just came back from teaching with Ram Dass. He says, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. Everything gets clear, right? But of course, it's our global family, and it's really obvious that no amount of outer development is going to save us. You know, no amount of computer technology and internet and nanotechnology and biotechnology and space technology, all the things that let me have in my smartphone in my pocket the great Library of Alexandria and 15 million cat videos and whatever, that's not going to stop continuing warfare. It's not going to stop racism. It's not going to stop economic injustice. It's not going to stop tribalism, because those all are rooted in the human heart, in our hearts. So we are what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, we are a nation of nuclear giants and ethical infants. And what's called upon us in this time is to match the remarkable outer development with the inner development of the heart. And there's nothing else that's really going to save us in the world. And that calls on you to do things that are difficult. Zen master Karlfried Durkheim says, the person who really being on the way falls upon hard times in the world will not as a consequence turn toward those friends who offer them refuge and comfort and encourage their old self to survive. Rather, they will seek out those who will faithfully and inexorably help them to risk themselves so that they may endure the difficulty and pass courageously through it. Only to the extent that a person exposes themselves over and over again to loss and annihilation can that which is indestructible be found within them. In this daring lies dignity and the true spirit of awakening. So it's tough. And the things in your life, the trauma that was talked about just now, which is a cultural trauma and a collective trauma. I know it when I was doing peace work in Palestine and Israel. They're all traumatized. And it's being reenacted until the trauma is faced and healed. The other is blamed. And James Baldwin puts it this way, and he really speaks to something so deep in our practice. He says, I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate and ignorance so stubbornly is because they sense that once hate is gone, they'll be forced to deal with their own pain. And if we can't deal with our own trauma and our own insecurity, then we project it on others. It's the immigrants, it's the Mexicans, it's the brown people, the black people, the yellow people, it's the gays, it's whoever's the enemy du jour. It was a communist when I was a kid, right? They're coming back around. There'll be an enemy against you. But as a culture, if we're in denial about our vulnerability, and we are vulnerable to one another, as the poet Rilke says, ultimately it's upon your vulnerability that you depend. We're vulnerable to each other every time we drive, that someone stops at the red light and lets us go through the green. We're vulnerable to our family. We don't need to go much further than that. You understand. We're vulnerable to how our culture, structures itself. So some people are cared for and some are, swept away or shot at. We're vulnerable to one another. And when we recognize this in ourselves, then we say, and it's what Sean was teaching, what Trudy was talking about, we're in this together. And to be able to meditate, to quiet the mind and tend the heart and cultivate some degree of presence, of compassion for ourselves and others, maybe this is the whole game. It's not about self-improvement. You've tried that. We know how that works, right? Therapy, yoga, jogging, meditation, coaching, diets, okay. You're a little better, maybe, if you're lucky, right? It's not about perfecting yourself. It's about perfecting your love. That's really all that liberates. It's all that liberates the heart. And then, there's so many more things that I want to say. Couple little stories and something to say. Sanjay Gupta, the CNN public doctor, went to meditate with the Dalai Lama and got to Dharamsala, and they made this whole arrangement, and they'd met before. So he went in at 4 in the morning, or 4:30, and the Dalai Lama gets up early meditating, and there was a seat next to him for Dr. Gupta to come in. So Sanjay Gupta comes in and takes the seat and starts to meditate, and Dalai Lama's quiet and meditating. This is a little intimidating, right? But there he is. Okay, I get to meditate with the Dalai Lama. And after about half an hour, Dalai Lama turns his head and he says, "Any questions?" And Sanjay looks back and says, "This is hard." Dalai Lama replies, "Me too." And that is really something important to take in. Now, why would it be hard for the Dalai Lama to meditate? The guy knows how to find his breath. He's been doing compassion practice for 50,000 lifetimes. But he also holds the tragedy of Tibet and the people of Tibet, that he can't go home, that their culture is being destroyed. He also holds the fact that the people of Sudan or Syria or, wherever it was, come to him and say, "You're a world leader, help us. Help us with the problems of our conflict and racism and all the things that are going on." He carries all that because he's open and human. And when he sits, it's not just that he's sitting, "I'm the Dalai Lama." He said, "I'm us. And you are too. You sit with us." So then the last piece to say for right now is Does this mean you should weep and rage? Yes. Sean was saying that she's going to have a workshop next week where you can do all that and get it out. It's fine. No, you actually need to honor your tears. There are two kinds of tears. There's the personal tears that if you haven't wept, that carry the trauma of your life, you will be harming yourself and others because it's all bottled up. But there's a second kind of tears called the tears of the way, the Dharma tears. And these are because your heart becomes tender and you carry the world in your heart. But it's not the end of the story. That's the first noble truth. There's suffering. There's its causes. The end of the story is that there is a freedom of the heart that's possible for you. And I watched my mentor and teacher, Mahagosananda, the Gandhi of Cambodia, walk through the killing fields, you know, leading people back to their villages, singing, "Hatred never ends by hatred, but by love alone is healed." This is the ancient and eternal law. And I remember with my daughter, Caroline, she and I have gone to a lot of different actions and demonstrations together. And I remember the first time she was with me when I got arrested, and she was like 9 years old or so, and they were putting those little handcuffs on you the way they do. And she started to weep, and she said, "Daddy, they're arresting you." I said, "This is cool, kid. This is great." And I started to kind of do a little dance with my hands together, you know. We were together. She's now a human rights immigration lawyer. And we were together at the San Francisco airport for the big demonstrations after that executive order to ban people coming in from the predominantly Muslim countries. There were 2,000 people there, and at the gate where we were, people chanting, "No ban, no fear, refugees are welcome here," with their signs. And you know how the demonstrations are. It's kind of an old form. We need to do it differently, by the way, okay? In the middle of our gate was a New Orleans jazz band. So we're chanting, "No ban, no fear." And the drummer kicks in and gives us a little bit of rhythm. You know, then the sax plays a little riff on top, and the trumpet plays a nice melody. And pretty soon we're going, "No ban, no fear, refugees, welcome here." We're singing together. The guards are smiling. The cops are like dancing with us, right? It was artful. We were there. We weren't going away. It mattered to us. It mattered to us, not just for the people who were being held in the airport, but it mattered because we had to stand up for what mattered in our hearts. As one of our founders said, one person with courage is a majority. And I had for a long time on my refrigerator that picture of the Chinese man with his shopping bag standing in front of the line of tanks. You know that famous image? One person with courage is a majority. So we're there, and we were having a good time. Molly Ivins, who's this great, really celebrated activist and writer and so forth, and one of those bigger-than-life Texan figures, she says, "So keep fighting for freedom and justice, beloveds, but don't forget to have fun doing it. Be outrageous, rejoice in all the oddities freedom can produce, and when you get done celebrating the sheer joy of a good fight for what you stand up for, be sure to tell others who follow you how much fun you had." So with the Dalai Lama, and there's this wonderful book called The Book of Joy, Tutu and the Dalai Lama brought together for, I think, the Dalai Lama's 80th birthday or something. And the main question, you know, that was asked is, how can you two laugh so much? I think people go to see the Dalai Lama not for those Tibetan teachings, which are so remarkable and profound that most of us don't really quite understand them, you know, or for the fact that he's this Nobel laureate, celebrated world peacemaker. I think people go by the thousands to hear him laugh. How can somebody be so joyful when carrying all of that? And he was asked, I mean, he and Tutu are teasing one another and joking and laughing. Tutu, the same thing. How can you have gone through apartheid and all this, the suffering? And Dalai Lama said, "They've taken so much from me. They've taken our temples, they've burned our sacred texts, they've taken my freedom to go home. Why should I let them take my happiness? Why should I let them take my happiness? So the meditation instruction from Laurie Chapman is this. She writes, I like nothing more in this whole world than sitting on my ass, being quiet, doing nothing. That's a first statement, okay? And it's a really good thing to do, to stop and listen deeply. And she goes on, and it's not my fault that I have this attitude because I happen to have an amazingly comfortable ass. If you could sit on this baby for even a few minutes, you'd realize that getting up off this ass would be a crime against nature. So the idea of a spiritual practice is not that it's a grim duty. It's an act of love. It's an act of love toward your body, toward the tears that you carry and the trauma, that you face, toward the beauty of the world, the unbearable beauty and the ocean of tears, and that you actually develop the capacity to be present for it with an open heart. And then you get up from wherever you sit. In Zen, they say there are only two things. You sit and you sweep the garden, like breathing in and out. You quiet the mind and tend the heart, and then you get up, and here's the garden of the world. And you get your broom, or whatever is your favorite instrument that it happens to be to play, and you sweep and you make beauty in this world, because that's what it's longing for. If you go in a refugee camp and you're depressed, they're not that interested. It's just not how it works. You have joy, you have a freedom to bring, and this is really what you can bring to the world. So thank you.